If you were the greatest salesperson on earth, what would you do? How would you show off that you're like the number one salesperson, that you can make people do absolutely anything? I've been really interested in this topic ever since reading the book How to Win Friends and Influence People a few years ago. The reason that this topic interests me a lot is because I used to think that anything outside of the hard sciences was sort of useless. Like if it's not engineering, if it's not related to the actual building of physical atoms doing things to make actual things happen, like electricity or roads or something like that, it's kind of, really fairy sort of stuff. It doesn't matter. But when I read that book on the recommendation of someone, I found it actually had a huge positive impact on my life. Now, the fundamental thing that this book does is it teaches you how to be almost like a bit of like a Machiavellian person from someone who doesn't necessarily have that as their like innate characteristic. So I was always someone who's like, let me be very, very honest with people. They want honesty. But what How to Win Friends and Influence People does is tells you, no, people often don't want honesty. What they want is affirmation. They want you to say what they want you to say. It sounds simple when you put it like that, right? But you often don't think about it. People want you to say what they, want you to say, right? So they typically want ego affirmation, affirmation that they're doing the right thing, and they want you to talk in ways that influence things that affect them. Not in a neutral manner. They don't want you to talk neutrally. They don't want you to talk honestly. They want you to talk in ways that positively impacts their life. So this is really interesting, and it sort of got me down thinking about psychology and how people are influenced and things of that manner. And honestly, it made a really positive impact on my life because I always found myself getting to very petty arguments with people. But nowadays, I never get into any petty arguments with people. I mean, just the other day, I got a little unlucky. I think I ran into, I was doing errands, and I ran into three different people that, like kind of salespeople, things like that, people you talk to over the counter. And for whatever reason, they were all being difficult. Like it's like there was a staff changeover at each place, and they were trying to follow the official rules, and instead of just letting me go about my day, just get what I want, they wanted to sort of make me sign things or blah blah blah. Just it happened in numerous places. But I actually managed to get what I want in each situation because I sat there, I gave them a smile, I went, hey, that makes a lot of sense. Can I help you follow through with this? How can we make this situation work for you? Oh, that makes a lot of sense. It's important to follow the rules. You're doing a good job. Thank you so much for helping me. And it's frustrating for me, these people sort of putting obstacles in my day. But if I put myself in their shoes and I sort of affirm their ego and I affirm their points of view and I speak in ways that interest them, then they will naturally have a very high likelihood of allowing me to get what I want as well. So yeah, that made a really big influence in my life. But the topic remains. If you were the greatest possible salesperson, it's not about the counter anymore. It's about, over the counter, pharmacy, gym, shopping for groceries, getting teeth cleaning. If it becomes something greater, you want to prove to the world you're the greatest possible salesperson, what do? Well, I would argue that what you would do to prove that you can make people do anything is to get people to stop having children. The reason that this is such an impressive feat is because you are literally going against billions of years of evolution. For billions of years, since the first cell, life has been replicating. And life which is not replicated has died. So there are literally billions of years worth of feelings, emotions, impulses, triggers, ways that your body is shaped, the help with procreation, that help you multiply into more cells. Okay? It's extremely fundamental to who you are. It's the most fundamental thing. So if you could convince people not to have children, this would be very impressive. Okay, so I've been sort of tangentially interested in the topic. And what I wanted to talk about today is I went to the library and I was reading this book. Okay, I have it on the screen. And this book, here's how it came to me. I started off in the economics section, microeconomics, because that interests me. And then I moved over next to the sort of business management section, which is right next to it. That sort of makes sense, right? It's applied microeconomics. Then we moved into entrepreneurship, okay, which I'm the most interested in, and I got a book from there. It's very interesting because, and this makes a lot of sense, right? You go from microeconomics to big business management stuff to entrepreneurship. There's a logical progression here. It starts at the top, goes lower down. And then it goes to consumer behavior, which makes even more sense, right? Because you started high-level economic concepts, then you got to big businesses, the small upcoming businesses, and then how do consumers actually behave? So there's a clear pyramid here, okay? And then there was some sort of Marxist stuff. I don't really pay too much attention to it, but sort of kind of macroeconomics, welfare, some communist stuff in there, like legitimately it says on there like socialism, whatever. But then the next section was even more sort of weird, okay? And it had to do with neo-Malthusian thought. Huh? What do you mean? Like economics, business, entrepreneurship, consumer behavior, sort of communism, I guess you could call it macroeconomics, and then neo-Malthusian thought? What? Because what happened to this sort of logical progression? Right? That's weird, okay? What if this progression actually makes sense, though? What if it's the case, okay, that consumer behavior is really related to Marxism and macroeconomics? Now, I can believe that because Marxism is really, it's an ideology that sprung from the aether, and it's still around today. So Marxism is very impressive in the manipulating the consumer. And neo-Malthusianism, at first it seems very unrelated, but then you start thinking back to that original question. If you were the greatest salesperson on earth, what would you do? Convince people not to have children, because you're literally fighting billions of years of evolution, and if you win, that's very impressive. That's very impressive. Doesn't matter how many resources you threw into it, that's very impressive. Okay, but then you're confronted with the fact that today we do not have children. People don't have children anymore. Right? And then you're seeing this library section, which converts consumer behavior research into Marxism, into neo-Malthusian thought. And just to give a little breakdown about neo-Malthusian thought for people who aren't aware, that has to do with the idea that Earth is overpopulated and that the population needs to be trimmed down. Okay, so that's pretty interesting, right? So I sort of thought, hey, that's a really interesting thought, but let me just file that away in the brain and let me go read a book on consumer behavior, because that's what I want to read about. And I read some interesting stuff in this book, which was about putting things, basically, if you want to convince someone to do something, you should put things in a justifiable box. So the example is, hey, do you want to sign up for a free trial of my product? And the person asks, why? But if you say, hey, as part of an experiment I'm running, could you sign up for a free trial of my product? Then the next response is probably going to be more likely to be how, or where can I do it? Because people put things in a box that are associated with doing a certain action, and then they don't actually have to make the choice about the action itself, because they put it in the higher level box, which is, okay, do I want to participate in an experiment, which is a lot easier than do I want to sign up for a free trial. That's a lot lower of a bar. But if you agree to the experiment, then your brain just sort of automatically says yes to the steps of the experiment. So that's a good trick, right? Another good trick they have is the idea of association. So it's the idea of associating certain concepts and values and attributes that are closely associated with something, like let's say having children. And then if you want an alternative behavior, you have to modify those other concepts that are most affiliated with doing the behavior you don't want or doing the behavior you do want, and then either decreasing or increasing their prominence depending on your desired outcome. So that's the idea of sort of association, which I also found interesting reading this book on the screen. Okay, but then, and I just thought this is so weird. I was reading this book, and it said on chapter 3, in this chapter, we shall explore several different approaches to ways of influencing attitudes and behavior. From the outset, we should make it clear why we are concerned with the attitudes people hold and not just the ways in which they behave. At first glance, it might seem that attitudes are unimportant. For example, unless the birth rates were to decrease, even an extreme change in birth control attitudes would not reduce the increased demand for food, energy, and space. In fact, some might argue that a reduction in birth rate is the only important issue. I'll repeat that again, okay? In fact, some people might argue that a reduction in birth rates is the only important issue. Where did that come from? The reduction in birth rates is the only important issue? I have never seen that spoken about. Have you ever seen a politician go that, okay, you know what we're going to do, guys? We're going to reduce birth rates. That's the only important issue. What? What is this? This is absurd. This is crazy. And they just throw it in there with no additional context. And then the remainder of this chapter, which is all about manipulating consumer behavior, okay, is all about shifting people's attitudes towards abortion to be negative by changing what its association, to be positive by changing what it's associated with. I mean, that's just really weird. We're starting to see a bit of a pattern here. It's like neo-Malthusian thought is sort of deeply embedded into the idea of manipulating people's opinions, which is really bizarre because I'd never seen a Malthusian thought talked about anywhere, basically, almost non-existent. But specifically in this field, which is all about manipulating how people think, it's extremely prominent. Now, guys, this is weird because people don't have children anymore, right? Isn't it a little bizarre, right? Billions of years of evolution and then not having children anymore. And then it just so happens that the field, which is responsible for manipulating your actions and behaviors of the masses, is obsessed about this issue. I'm just throwing that out there, okay? So, to end off here, I kind of just wanted to take a little clip that I think is just totally endemic, or showcases this situation in a really effective way. Okay, let's see this. Okay, I don't want to obey. That's weird. You put on the glasses and suddenly, what's happening here? These are, by the way, these are like glasses that make it so that you perceive things as they really are. Like this movie is about aliens controlling the world, and like if you put on the glasses, you can see the messaging. But you don't want to obey, right? Like that's your association. I don't want to obey this random sign. again with the obeying, I don't want to obey. Marry and reproduce. What? Marry and reproduce is put in the same uh, line as obey. So the implication in this movie, which is all about sort of like seeing the propaganda, the implication is that marrying and reproducing is the same as this thing telling you to obey. It's obey. Somehow marrying and reproducing is obeying, right? As if a virus that is replicating through your cells is somehow like it's like obeying and the virus like invading you, like as if that's the same. Obeying and reproducing are like two contradictory opinions, right, in real life. But in this movie, and the more you sort of pick up on this, it's like in every single Hollywood movie, it's this weird double bluff. Like, no one naturally comes up with that. That's so weird. Like, marrying and reproducing is like what the aliens are telling us to do. Why would they need to tell us to do that? Every single life form does that, right? That's just bizarre. Okay, and now I think there's a clip here later on. Like he looks out at the whole world, okay, and he sees like all the messages. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah, hopefully you can see this. It's like basically it's like have no ideas, consume, submit, have no thoughts, stay asleep. These are all bad things you don't want to be doing, right? He's pretty glad he has the glasses on, okay? But then it's marry and reproduce. What? Why is marrying and reproducing being put in the same category as like obeying and having no ideas? I mean, that's just so bizarre. That's just an inversion of the world as it is, right? And this is a movie all about like stopping the propaganda. So I guess I don't really have a point in all of this, okay? But I just wanted to say that it's really bizarre how this movie puts no marrying and or marrying and reproducing as something that you're being like manipulated to do, despite the fact it's just a biological reality. It's also weird that we're not having children in the modern day. That's bizarre because billions of years of evolution support that. It's also bizarre that the consumer behavior section was right next to the neo-Malthusian thought section. That is bizarre. And it is also bizarre that in this book about consumer behavior, it's just thrown out there, like with no context, that some people say that reducing the birth rate is the only important issue of our time. What? Like, I don't agree with that. I'm sure most people don't agree with that. And it's just thrown out there like, I don't know, if you say something crazy like that, you have to at least back it up, but they don't even feel a need, which tells me that this is a very common thought because they then spend the rest of this chapter explaining how to manipulate people's thoughts regarding abortion. Now, I don't have any strong feelings about abortion, but that's really bizarre. Okay, so I guess that's just something to consider. Like, if you are able to know how they manage to convince people not to have children, the people in the marketing firms and all that, then you're essentially able to convince people to do anything. You could convince people to go to war. You could convince people to die for you. You could convince people to buy all your stuff, to do whatever you want, because you were able to convince them to go against their most fundamental biological urge, which is to reproduce, by associating it with things like having no thoughts, obeying, submitting, by associating those things. And this book, it goes into detail about the abortion. It can't happen just in one place. It has to come from multiple different angles to create webs of associations. But I don't know, clearly they managed to do it. And I think we as people that want to do well in this world should, congratulate them on a job well done, and then ask them how they did it, because this is really useful knowledge. So that's just a thought to think about. Thank you so much.